episode 19 of The World Show with Equity Kings. Welcome to The World Show. My name is TUMISHO, and today I want to bring your attention to something very interesting and kind of very stupid when you think about it. This is from Yahoo Finance. So I was recently scrolling on YouTube. I was just looking at YouTube videos, and then I came across this one video from Yahoo Finance, right? They were interviewing this lady called, what's her name? CHARLENE FADIREPO. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So Yahoo Finance was interviewing this lady, founder of Guide Finance. And then she claimed she was talking about Bitcoin, right? Because the company is about spreading the word of Bitcoin and helping people to invest in crypto. So this is what she said. She said, "We believe Bitcoin will allow Black Americans to build generational wealth. Not just Black Americans, Latino Americans, the LGBT communities, and indigenous people." So, so she's saying, right, and this is her words, not mine. She specifically said in the interview, she said that Bitcoin is a tool for social justice. It is a tool for social justice. So let's think about that. How on earth is Bitcoin going to be a tool for social justice? This makes no sense at all when you think about it. So think about social justice and people being left out of the banking system, because that's what she's talking about in the interview. She goes on to say, okay, Black Americans, Latino Americans, LGBTQ have been traditionally left out of the banking system, and therefore because they've been left out of the banking system, the solution is Bitcoin. Bitcoin solves this problem. Wait a minute, before we even get into Bitcoin, let's talk about why she's wrong, or why I believe she's wrong about the whole social justice thing. I am constantly listening to music every single day, 24/7, and the one place that I trust the most is Apple Music. The benefits of using Apple Music is that you can listen to over 75 million songs ad-free with zero commercials, plus get unlimited downloads to your library and listen anywhere without Wi-Fi or using data. There's no commitment and you can cancel anytime. They have a 3-month special for free, so you can listen to Apple Music for 3 full months for free, and then you can choose whether to pay or not. And it's extremely affordable. So click the link in the description to sign up and enjoy listening to quality music for free. So what are you waiting for? So let's think about it. What is social justice, right? Social justice is, okay, there's a bunch of bad things happening to Black and Latino Americans and whatever the list is. I think anyone could be on that list as long as you're not white and a man. Anyone can be on that list, honestly speaking. So the system is institutional racism. There's all sorts of problems and racism, segregation, white privilege, all these things. And Black Americans are getting hit the hardest because of this racism that is going on, or because of sexism for women, or because of homophobia in the LGBT community, or whatever. Whoever's on that list, again, anyone could be on that list as long as you're not a white person and a man, right? Anyone can be on that list. So let's think about the problem with that. So she claims that Black people have been left out of the banking system, and then she'll use things like, she'll use fancy statistics. Like, these guys like to cherry pick these statistics. So she'll use one of those statistics that say, okay, Black people get home loans at a lower rate than white Americans, right? White Americans get a home loan at a higher rate than Black people. Okay, on the surface, this looks like institutional racism, because this is what these people keep talking about. Okay, institutional racism. That makes sense. Until you discover that, oh, okay, Asian Americans get loans at a higher rate than white Americans. Let's think about that. If Asian Americans are getting loans at a higher rate than white Americans, and white Americans are getting a loan at a higher rate than Black Americans, does that mean that white Americans are being racist to black Americans, because according to that logic, if that is the case, if racism is the problem, then it should also apply that Asian Americans are racist to white Americans, which is obviously nonsense, because Asian Americans are the ones who are getting these Asian hate crimes, not the other way around. So when you think about it, according to their logic, it doesn't make sense. But also, one of the reasons why blacks get turned down for loans at a higher rate than whites, or why whites get loans at a higher rate than blacks, is because white Americans have a higher credit score than black Americans. So if you have a higher credit score, obviously you're going to get approved for loans at a higher rate than that specific group. You see? And this is when you putting it as a group, right? You're not putting it individually. You're not saying, oh, this white person is getting a loan at a higher rate. We're talking about as a group, as a collective, which is one of the problems with this argument, but I'll get into it in just a second. So the same is true for Asian Americans, because Asian Americans' credit score on average is higher than the credit score of white people in America. Not just in America, you can even look at the statistics from the UK. In England, white people don't have the highest credit scores. It's Indian, what do you call it? Indian British. So it's Indian British and some Asian British. Depends which Asians you're specifically talking about. Yes, and Chinese Asians. So when you think about that, when you actually look at it like that, if Asians are getting a higher credit score, if Asians have a higher credit score, obviously they're going to get loans at a higher rate than white people and a way higher rate than black people. So when you think about that, this has nothing to do with racism. I mean, it's not to say that some banks don't discriminate. Yes, there are some banks that do discriminate, but that does not explain why this gap exists. Just like the previous episode that we made, I spoke about the gender pay gap, right? You can look at the gender pay gap and say, how can this be racism if the logic doesn't make sense? The logic does not make sense. You guys should listen to that episode. I went into deep analysis of why the gender pay gap is nonsense. And not to say it's completely nonsense, but yes, there are specific employers that are paying women less deliberately. But on net average, on net total, that is not the reason for the pay gap. The pay gap has economic and cultural reasons, just the same way as this gap between people who get loans at a higher rate has to do with economic reasons. One of the reasons is a lot of black people happen to live in dangerous neighborhoods, right? So there's many reasons for these things. So to say that it has something to do with racism is just lazy analysis, in my opinion. This is why social justice doesn't make sense at all. And one of the reasons why it does not make sense, before I get into the Bitcoin story with this lady, I'm just pointing out why her idea of social justice is complete nonsense and it doesn't make sense. And by the way, I'm not trying to attack this lady. I'm just analyzing what she's saying. She told us this, and I'm telling her, or I'm explaining why her points are wrong or why her points are BS. So when you look at what was I talking about? I think I was talking about social justice, right? One of the reasons why social justice is stupid is because when you use the term social, you are referring to a collective, right? You collectivize the whole idea of social justice. You say that, social justice, it means that black people as a collective are suffering and white people as a collective are doing well. So when you collectivize the whole thing, you basically put everyone in one basket and you say, okay, they're all suffering. That's what you're saying when you collectivize it, which is wrong, because instead of collectivizing it, you're supposed to individualize it, because certain black people experience racism. Not every black person experiences racism. So how can you therefore say social justice where social justice is collectivizing the whole thing? And it's wrong to collectivize the whole thing, because not every black person experiences the same thing. And the same is true for LGBTQ. The same is true for women, right? The same is true for whatever. As I said before, I'm going to repeat this again. Anyone can fall in these categories as long as you're not white and a man. So when you think about this, social justice makes no sense, right? So let's just get into her argument for Bitcoin, right? Her first argument is, she said Bitcoin is a wealth building tool for black Americans and women of color, specifically women of color. So she's talking about black Americans, black women, Latino women, what do you call those people again? Latino women and Native Americans, right? Sorry for that, Native Americans. So these specific women don't have a lot of wealth, and therefore Bitcoin is the solution to that problem. And this is the problem with her argument. So the first problem that I would like to point out with that argument is, let's think about this clearly. Let's go through a thought experiment. If Bitcoin was truly a wealth building tool, why promote it as a currency for minorities to use daily, right? Because this is what she said in the interview, and I'll put the interview in the description if I have to. But this is exactly what she said. She said that Bitcoin is its own bank. Bitcoin, people, when they use Bitcoin, become their own bank. So these black women, these women of color, can become their own bank, and therefore Bitcoin is a currency for the people, specifically a currency for women of color, right? And this is the problem. Why would it be a currency at the same time a wealth building tool? This makes no sense. It can't be a wealth building tool and still being used as a medium of exchange. Implying that it creates wealth means that it's volatile and cannot function as a medium of exchange. Let's think about it. Why would you say Bitcoin is a currency for the people, like people can become their own bank, at the same time you saying it's a wealth building tool? Let's think about this. If I have rands, right, I'm talking to South Africans. If I have rands or dollars or whatever, right, whatever currency, yen, euro, whatever it is, obviously I live in South Africa, so I use rands, right? If I use rands as a currency, right, how am I using rands as a wealth building tool? Let's be honest with ourselves. How am I using rands? Whenever I'm holding a rand, right, whenever I'm holding rands, because that's the money that's what my money is denominated in, or my currency rather, to be specific, because money and currency isn't the same thing. So my currency is denominated in rands. How the heck am I using those rands for wealth building? Sure, I can invest, but how am I specifically holding those rands and wishing that it appreciates in value and just waiting for it to go up 100% against the dollar? There's no way I'm holding rands for that. No, I'm holding rands to buy goods and services, maybe to invest in property. Who knows what I'm using rands for? But the one thing I'm not using rands for is wealth building. I'm most definitely, neither are you. No one is holding dollars for wealth building, right? Unless it would make sense if I am holding dollars for wealth building, because I don't use it as a medium of exchange. I don't live in the United States, so I don't use dollars as a medium of exchange. We use rands. So it would make sense for me to use dollars as a wealth building tool, but it wouldn't make sense for an American to use dollars as a wealth building tool. How the heck are you doing that? No one who lives in America is holding dollars and waiting for it to go up 50, 100%. So assuming that Bitcoin is a wealth building tool, it cannot also be a medium of exchange. How can it function as a medium of exchange at the same time function as a wealth building tool? Because those two cannot coexist. Because if it is a medium of exchange, it has to be stable, right? That's the whole point of a medium of exchange. It has to be relatively stable. Its value should be stable. Now, Bitcoin is definitely not stable. It's the most unstable asset on the planet, let alone currency. If you're gonna classify it as a currency, it is so unstable. At the same time, she says that Bitcoin is an asset class, and then she goes back and says Bitcoin is a currency. You see, this lady, her arguments are so invalid. They are so stupid when you think about it. And no offense, I don't mean to say anything bad about her, but her arguments do not make sense. How can it be a wealth building tool at the same time a medium of exchange? Makes no sense to me. If you think it makes sense, please tell me why in the comments. So going to a second argument, she actually wrote a book, a kiddies book called this is funny. The title of the book is called Said's Satoshis. So let's think about this. Why would you write a book about Bitcoin? Of course, she's a Bitcoin lover, so she'd do anything for Bitcoin. I mean, she'd go down on her knees for Bitcoin or something like that. So she wrote a book about a kiddies book. She did a kiddies book about Bitcoin, Said's Satoshis. Why do I think that's a problem? Is because why should children why should babies, because this is for toddlers and babies, right? Why should toddlers and babies have to learn about Bitcoin? What does Bitcoin have to do with toddlers, right? Let's think about it. A colorful book that only has a few words, easy words, and it's just colorful. Why should that be taught to toddlers? What does it have to do with toddlers? Like, think about it. So, in fact, yes, it has everything to do with toddlers, because Bitcoin is a complete joke. So, obviously, it's just for playing. People are just playing with their money. They're just gambling with their money. So, obviously, okay, it makes sense that it's for toddlers, because clearly it should attract toddlers, because that's the type of things toddlers do. They do very risky things, and they don't care about the consequences. So, yes, Bitcoin is for toddlers in that sense. So, it's not for grown-ass adults. It's for toddlers. So, yeah. One other argument she made was she was talking about Bitcoin as a tool for regulation, right? She said as Bitcoin gains more regulatory clarity, it'll become a trusted currency, a trusted asset class, and therefore more people can get into Bitcoin as regulations tighten and there's more regulatory clarity. So this lady is completely out of her head. So think about it. Why should you advocate as a Bitcoin lover, as a maximalist? I don't know if she's a maximalist, but I'm sure she's there, because she basically has a whole business about Bitcoin. So I'll consider her a maximalist. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but she's probably a maximalist. So how can a Bitcoin maximalist like her advocate for regulations in Bitcoin? Not cryptocurrency, but Bitcoin specifically. Why would you do that? If you're for Bitcoin, why would you be for regulations? This makes no sense, because the whole purpose of Bitcoin is to be decentralized and it should not be regulated. That's the whole point of Bitcoin. It isn't supposed to be a tool for regulation. Regulatory bodies shouldn't even be regulating Bitcoin. So you as a Bitcoin proponent shouldn't advocate for such regulations. But it doesn't surprise me, because her hypocrisy is out of this world. And of course, she used to work at the Federal Reserve. That's what she said in the interview. She was some regulator at the Federal Reserve. So it makes sense that she would obviously want Bitcoin. She loves Bitcoin, but also she loves regulation. So she's like, what should I do? Maybe I should promote regulation in Bitcoin. And because I used to be a regulator, I mean, this is what I love. I love regulating things. So let me push for more regulations in Bitcoin. But at the same time, let me just tell everyone how decentralized it is, because that's exactly what she said in the interview, which is why I suggest you guys listen to the interview. Watch the interview. You will see her lips moving as she utters such nonsense. She speaks about Bitcoin as a decentralized currency, and then she goes on and then she says, it should have more regulatory clarity. I mean, this makes no sense at all. And one of the ways the hypocrisy in that argument is Yahoo Finance in the interview. If you're actually watching the interview, if you're not listening to it, if you're watching the interview, when you watch it, when you actually looking at the interview, it'll specifically point out that out of 14% of Americans that own crypto, 74% are men, 71% are white. So Yahoo Finance is pointing this out as a sign that social justice is therefore needed, and therefore Bitcoin is the solution to social justice, right? So that's the whole point. That's the whole reason why. So ironically, this is the irony of this statistic. So think about this statistic, right? Where do you get the statistic that says 71%? Where do you get the statistics with the demographics of who owns Bitcoin if Bitcoin is decentralized? Obviously, this is coming from centralized Bitcoin exchanges or crypto exchanges, which then again destroys the argument of Bitcoin and its anonymity and its decentralization and all of that nonsense. Because if you have demographics and statistics, that assumes that exchange is centralized, like Coinbase, etc. So ironically, the statistic comes from a regulated crypto exchange and not unregulated exchanges. So what's the purpose of Bitcoin's anonymity if the government knows everything about the buyers? Think about that. If government knows everything about who's getting into Bitcoin, what's the point of it? what is the point of it? Let's just assume that every single person who owned crypto was a white person, or let's say 99% of people who owned Bitcoin were white, right? They were just white men specifically. Let's think about that. Obviously, the government would because the government doesn't like crypto, the government doesn't like Bitcoin at all. And I'm not trying to defend Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. No, that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to run through a thought experiment. So let's think about this. If 99% of people who own Bitcoin were men, white men specifically, and we all know that the government does not like crypto, this is just hilarious when you think about it. If the government knows everything about it, wouldn't they spin it into a social justice story? Wouldn't they say, oh, look at this, you guys, look at this. We have a reason why we should ban crypto, because 99% of people who own crypto are white. Therefore, it promotes white supremacy. I mean, this is the kind of nonsense that the government would go out saying, because this is the type of nonsense that people actually like listening to. Okay, those social justice advocates are going to say, yes, that is a sign that Bitcoin is a danger to society because it's a tool, it's a currency, it's an asset that white people can use, white supremacists can use to further their own agendas. The alt-right, the neo-Nazis can use that as a sign of their authority, that they own this asset or something like that. I don't know what the arguments would be, but it'd be along those lines. So obviously, if they have the statistics, they could just use the demographics with those statistics to further their own political narrative against Bitcoin. Not to say that I like Bitcoin or anything. I don't like Bitcoin, but it's to say it's unfair for the government to now have these statistics, which is why these exchanges shouldn't be regulated in the first place, because that's the whole point of Bitcoin, right? That is the whole point of Bitcoin. Why should Bitcoin be regulated? It's supposed to be decentralized. I would like for it to go to zero as a decentralized platform, not as a centralized platform, because that's why I think Bitcoin is eventually going. Okay, not zero. Let me be fair, not zero, maybe, because it's highly overvalued right now. That's a fact. Bitcoin is not valued at 60,000. I mean, that's not the true value of Bitcoin. The true value of Bitcoin should be below $1,000 a Bitcoin. So, but that's an argument for a separate day. So that's it, guys. Thank you for tuning into this episode, and we will see you on the next episode.